As Prelims 2024 is fast approaching, it's now time for us to revise. And Legacy IAS brings you a series of revision of all the subjects. Here we will be beginning with revision of economy for UPSC Prelims 2024. In just 5 hours, we'll be revising the entire economy subject, right? Along with the previous year questions. Now, how is that possible? That is possible because we will be looking at the most important concepts based on the trend of the UPSC paper over 20-25 years. What all topics have been asked, what all kind of questions are asked, what all questions can be asked. All those things have been taken into account to design this entire series of revision in just 5 years along with the previous year questions. Alright, so let's get started. What we will do here is we will look at the important chapters. In that we will look at the important concepts. We will discuss that. I will explain that to you. If anything additional is required, I'll be giving you that. And subsequently, based on whatever things we understand, whatever concepts we understand, we will be solving previous year questions that have been asked based on it. Now remember, when we solve previous year questions, in those questions, we'll not just look at the question and get the answer and move ahead. Rather, what we will do is focus on other options as well, why they are wrong and what are they all about. Why? Because what UPSC does is, if they've asked you a question 2 years back, and one of them is the correct option, after a few years they may ask questions based on the remaining 2-3 options which were there. So in that manner, a comprehensive revision of economy and other subjects will also take place in this series. I will be teaching you the economy part. And if you do that religiously, if you do this religiously, I'm sure it's going to help you a lot. You'll be able to solve a lot of questions. A lot of questions based on what all we'll be discussing will be asked in your upcoming prelims exam. So let's get started. The very first or the basic or the most important topic initially in economy is national income accounting. Now in national income accounting, there are few concepts that are very important. They are considered to be very basic, but at times can be very confusing. That is your GDP, gross domestic product, GNP, your gross national product, NDP, net domestic product, and NNP, that is your net national product. So first things first, what is GDP? What is gross domestic product? Now if you look at it, the name itself gives the hint or gives the answer. Let's try to break it down. Before I explain, let's break down the name itself. What do you mean by gross? By gross you would mean total. For example, your gross salary, it is the total. What do you mean by domestic? You know, if you would have traveled by flight, there are domestic flights and there are international flights. International flights go to other countries. What is a domestic flight? Domestic flight flies within the boundary of a particular country. So domestic flight of India will fly within the boundary of India. That means domestic means what? Within the boundary. And since we are discussing GDP of India, it will be within the boundary of India. Clear? Domestic is within the boundary of India in this case because it's Indian economy. We are looking at the GDP of India. Now, what is product? Now, product here can be goods as well as services. Even services are known as products. So here, not just the goods which are tangible, but services which are intangible will also be taken into account. So here you would be talking about goods and services. Now which goods and services? Not intermediary, but the final goods and services. We will be talking about the final goods and services. The final goods and services. So gross is total, domestic is within the boundary of India, product is the final goods and services. That means, what does your GDP become? Your GDP becomes the total value of the final goods and services produced within the boundary of India. So GDP is nothing but the total value. Total value of what? Of the final goods and services produced where? Within the boundary of India. That is your GDP. So all the final goods and services which are being produced within the boundary of India will be your GDP. Remember, it does not talk about by whom. A foreigner can come in India and produce, it is still a part of GDP. An alien from Mars can come in India and produce, it is still a part of the GDP of India. Why? Because it is being produced within the boundary of India, no matter who produces it. If it produces automatically by magic also within the boundary of India, it is GDP. Clear? So be very clear on this definition. Do not get confused. What about if foreigners produce anything? Is it talking about anything? No. It's just talking about within the boundary of India, no matter who produces it. Now, the concept of GNP is sort of dissimilar in the sense that when you talk about GNP, so when you talk about GNP, again similar things would be there. For example, gross is there. So we know the meaning of gross. Gross is total. National product. It is now national product. So we know the meaning of product also. Product is nothing but the final goods and services. So GNP, that is your gross national product. GNP, your gross national product, will be the total value of final goods and services. Here, instead of domestic, it is national. So national is related to nationals. Who is a national? Nationals are the citizens. A national is a citizen. So nationals are the citizens. So it is the total value of the final goods and services produced by the nationals. And since we are talking about the Indian GDP, it would be the Indian nationals. Indian nationals. So what is gross national product? Total value of final goods and services produced by whom? By the Indian nationals. There the question was where? Within the boundary of India. So domestic product. By whom? By the Indian nationals. Hence, it is the gross national product. Now remember, it is by the Indian nationals. That means it can be produced outside India also. If Indian nationals are going abroad and producing something, it will still be part of the GNP. I hope that's absolutely clear. Now, these are the only two things which you require to understand. Do not worry about net domestic product and net national product. It is very simple. I'll tell you what it is. So when it comes to net, what are we doing? We are basically from gross converting into net. From gross domestic product, we are converting into net domestic product. So the concept will remain same. What will change? Gross minus depreciation. Gross minus depreciation will be equal to net. Since gross minus depreciation equal to net, that means gross domestic product minus depreciation is equals to net domestic product, and gross national product minus depreciation will be equal to net domestic product. Now what is this depreciation? See, whenever you are producing the goods and services in an economy, there would be wear and tear of the things which you are using to produce those goods and services. The wear and tear of machinery, for example. So if the life of a machinery of 10 years, every year you can say, for example, 10% of the machinery is getting depreciated. So that value you have to exclude from the gross domestic product in order to get the net domestic product, and you have to exclude that value from the gross national product in order to get the net national product. Alright, so these are the concept of gross national product, gross domestic product, and their net. Now, let's quickly look at the questions, the kind of questions that are being asked. Many a times you may see the questions may not be generally, let's say, relating to the concepts that are there, as in the theoretical concept, but at times with respect to that concept, very commonsensical questions can be asked. So you need to focus on that as well. Okay, let's have a look at these questions. With reference to the Indian economy, consider the following statements. Statement 1 says the rate of growth of real gross GDP. Rate of growth of real gross GDP has steadily increased in the last decade. That's statement 1. Statement 2, the gross domestic product at market prices in rupees has steadily increased in the last decade. So, now the question is, are these correct or not? We need not know exactly, but by logic we can understand whether they are correct or not. For example, the statement 1, the rate of growth of real GDP has steadily increased. The rate of growth, first is the rate of growth, and that too of what? The real GDP. So what do you mean by real GDP? See, GDP can be nominal, another concept we will be doing now, and GDP can be real. Nominal as in, if you are calculating a GDP for the year 2023-24, you will be, if you are calculating the GDP for the year 2023-2024 at the price or at the rate prevailing in that particular year, that is 2023 and 2024, then that GDP is your nominal GDP. Right? Because I'll tell you why. Before that, let's understand what's real GDP. If you are calculating, let's say, a GDP for 2023-24 at some base year, let's say that base year is 2011. Now, this GDP is your real GDP, right? Why? Because whatever you have produced, you are calculating based on this base year. So you are not taking into account the increase that has happened due to the increase of inflation. So inflation amount is reduced. That is why it is showing the real GDP, the real production. See, your GDP can increase only if the inflation is increasing, then also your GDP can increase. Let's say in a year an economy produced just 1 pen, which was of 50 rupees. Next year also that economy produced just 1 pen. Now the cost of the pen is 100 rupees. So the GDP will increase from 50 to 100. But did the production increase? No, the economy produced the same single pen both the times. But the production did not increase for real. Only the value increased due to inflation. So that would be your nominal GDP. Right? So to actually get the real GDP, you have to remove the effect of inflation. How do you remove? By calculating GDP at a base year and not the present year, because the present year takes into account the increase in prices as well, that is the inflation as well. So when inflation is a part of the GDP, then it's a nominal GDP. Basically, you can understand that when you are calculating a GDP for a particular year with respect to the prices prevailing in that particular year, it's a nominal GDP. When you are calculating GDP of a particular year with respect to the prices of some base year, then it is a real GDP. Okay, so nominal GDP can easily increase because inflation is there. For real GDP to increase, it takes some doing. So here they are asking about increase in real GDP, and not just the increase, that if previously if it was, let's say, 100 and then it became 110 and then it became 112, then it became 113. So this is first year, this is second, this is third, this is fourth. This would be the increase in GDP, correct? But they are asking the rate of growth. So is the rate of growth also steadily increasing? Absolutely not. Here the rate of growth from 100 to 110 was 10%. From 110 to 112 was less than close to 2%. From 112 to 113 was less than 1%. So even though the GDP is increasing, the rate of growth of GDP is not increasing. And in India, in no 10-year series, it has so happened that the rate of growth of GDP has steadily or continuously increased. So the first statement is absolutely wrong. The second statement says that the gross domestic product at market prices in rupees has steadily increased in the last decade. Yes, because here they are not asking about the rate. They are just saying that the gross domestic product has increased. and GDP has kept on increasing. Even at times if the production is exactly the same or even slightly less, even then the GDP at market prices can increase because there will be inflation. A 10 rupees pen, if it costs, if there is a, let's say if there is a 10 rupees pen, now if the inflation is 10% and economy produced only one pen previously, now also it produced only one pen. So previously the GDP would be 10 rupees. And now the GDP would be 11 rupees. Why? Because inflation is there. So just by the account of inflation itself, the GDP can increase. And anyhow, the production keeps on increasing at least slightly year on year. Here, since they are not talking about the rate, hence this statement is correct. So the correct answer would be B only. Let's move on to the next question in the context of economy. Now a similar kind of a question. In the context of Indian economy, consider the following statements. The growth rate of GDP has steadily increased in the last 5 years. Growth rate, again talking about the growth rate. No. Growth rate consecutively for 5 years, it has not, because it's the growth rate. If they would have asked the GDP has grown, possibly yes, but the growth rate, no. The growth rate in per capita income has steadily increased in the last 5 years. Growth rate in per capita income. Per capita income would have increased, but the growth rate in per capita income, again a no. So as you are seeing, all the growth rate things with respect to 5 years or 10 years are not correct. So the correct answer here is D, neither 1 nor 2. Now, the national income of a country for a given period is equal to what? National income would be equal to what? The total value of goods and services produced by the nationals. Now you will be able to get the answer. National income. Nationals. I think you already got the answer, but let us look at the other options as well. Sum of the total consumption and investment expenditure. No. Sum of personal income of all individuals. The money value of final goods and services. So confusion could be here. Sum of personal income of all individuals. Sum of personal income of all individuals would be personal income, not national income. From national income, you need to minus the taxes and all to get the personal income, right? So national income is what? The total value of the goods and services produced by the national. That means what? It is nothing but gross national income they are talking about, but national income in its purest form is the net national product. So what would be the net national product? The total value of goods and services produced by the nationals. That is your net national product. You will be subtracting the depreciation. Going on, increase in absolute and per capita real GNP do not connote a higher level of economic development if. Now please understand, here I will give you two sentences. Make sure you write those two sentences. It's very important in your answer writing. It will help you solve prelims questions also. What are those things? Remember, economic growth, the first statement is economic growth is a prerequisite. Prerequisite as in a requirement. A necessary requirement is a prerequisite for economic development. See, when you are doing economic development, includes increase in employment, increase in literacy, reduction in poverty. Now, how can you reduce poverty? Let's say you are giving some money, some cheap food, so on and so forth. Now, how can you do that? When you have some money to distribute. Now, how will you have money to distribute? When there is economic growth. So, to distribute money, you need to first have the money. Hence, for economic growth, for economic development, first you have to have the economic growth. So, economic growth is a prerequisite for economic development. But economic growth need not necessarily lead to economic development. For example, economic growth is there, but you are not providing any respite to the poor, no scheme for poverty eradication, no scheme for employment, no scheme for literacy, then it will not lead to economic development, correct? So remember these two lines, economic growth is a prerequisite for economic development, but economic growth need not necessarily lead to economic development. Having said that, let's look at the question. Increase in absolute and per capita real GNP, that means economic growth is happening. Do not connote a higher level of economic development, meaning it need not necessarily reflect in higher economic development if industrial output fails to keep pace with agriculture output. No, nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do. Economic development is related to socio-economic issues, poverty, illiteracy, unemployment, so on and so forth. Agriculture output fails to keep pace with industrial output. It's the same sentence in different manner. Industrial output fails to keep pace with agriculture output means nothing but agriculture output failing to keep pace with agriculture output. Since the statements are same, both cannot be correct. So anyhow, this would also be wrong. Imports grow faster than exports? Not necessarily. It has nothing to do with the economic development. It is again with respect to economic growth, not development, and foreign exchange, not development. So this is wrong. So what is the correct answer? Poverty and unemployment increases. So even if there is economic growth, but poverty and unemployment is increasing, that means what? That means that it does not indicate a higher level of economic development, even though the economic growth is there. I hope that's absolutely clear. Now, so our national income accounting is now done. Now let's move on to capital formation. So capital formation, in capital formation you will have capital getting accumulated. Let's understand what is capital formation. Now if I am earning some amount of money and what I am doing is I am, let's say for example I am completely utilizing it. If I completely utilize it, spend everything, will I have anything accumulated with me? Absolutely not. But if something gets saved, or let's say I invest something in capital asset, that would lead to formation of the capital. So formation of the capital can be in a liquid form, formation of the capital can be in an asset form, and when either of the two is there, then you can say that capital formation is happening. And that is very important. Why it is important? It is important simply because when there is capital formation, let's say in the form of asset, okay, so what can be that asset, that capital asset? It can be your roads, it can be your metros, it can be your hospitals, it can be your educational institutes, as in schools, colleges, right, runways, railways, so on and so forth. Now these things, please remember, they generate revenue. They generate revenue and hence keep moving the economy forward. Okay, that's the importance of capital formation. Now before that, let's understand one more concept, capital output ratio. What is the capital output ratio? Capital output ratio is the capital required per unit of output. Okay, capital required per unit of output. If you want an output of X amount, if the capital required is high, then capital output ratio will be high. So you will require more capital for small amount of output. Remember that. Okay, now let's look at the question. Despite being a high saving economy, capital formation may not result in a significant increase in output. Capital formation may not result in a significant increase in output due to what? Due to weak administrative machinery, due to illiteracy, due to high population density. Now if these would have been the reason, just imagine, these options are similar. Illiteracy, high population density. So all of them cannot be correct at once. Also, this is nothing but the classical definition of high capital output ratio. What is high capital output ratio? You require a lot of capital just for a small amount of output. That is why, despite being a high saving economy, the capital formation, that means high saving economy, that means you're saving a lot of capital, but that is not leading to a significant increase in output. Why? Because your capital output ratio is high, right? So the correct answer would be high capital output ratio. Now, economic growth in country X. So talking about the economic growth, we have understood the concept of economic growth as well as the concept of economic development. Economic growth in country X will increase in country X will necessarily have to occur if there is technical progress in the world. See, here they are asking about economic growth in country X, but then talking about technical progress in the world economy. So again wrong, because the world in general can have technical progress, but the economy X need not necessarily be progressing. If they would have said country X, then we could have given a thought. Okay, but then also technical progress need not necessarily lead to it. Second is there is population growth in in country X. Now population growth alone in country X cannot lead to economic growth. That population needs to be converted into human capital. How does the population gets converted into human capital? By education, skill development and proper health. So just an increase in the population growth need not necessarily mean economic growth. Correct? Now, this says the volume of trade grows in the world economy. Again, it is growing in the world economy. It is not growing in country X. Also, even if they would have said country X, just the growth of volume of trade doesn't mean economic growth, right? Because trade can increase even when the imports are higher, right? So this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. There is capital formation in country X. Capital formation as in you are now saving money, you are now having money, you are now having capital, you are now forming the capital. So when can you form the capital? When the economy is growing. Hence, economic growth in country X will necessarily have to occur if there is capital formation. Clear? Now, human capital and social capital. I already briefly explained to you about the human capital. So what is human capital? See, you have a population. When to this population you add education, you add skills, you add health, it becomes human capital. Meaning now this population is able to work, to participate in the economy, to produce and to increase the productivity of the economy and to lead to economic growth in an economy. So population, when provided with education, skills and health, will get converted to human capital. So human capital is nothing but an educated, skilled and healthy population. I hope that's absolutely clear. So how can human capital be formed? By providing these things to the population. Now what is a social capital? So when we talk about human capital, it is very individualistic. I am a part of the population. If I am educated, I am skilled, I am healthy, I am a part of the human capital. Now like this, many other people part of the human capital. Let's say we have crores, millions and millions of people part of human capital. Now what relation do we have among each other? Do we have networking? Do we know each other? Do we have the trust among each other? So if, when the society has a trust and an integration among the human capitals, right, among the constituents of the human capitals, meaning among the individual who are part of the human capital, then you can say that that society has social capital. Now how social capital can be formed? By the trust developed among the individuals of the human capital. So both are intangible concepts. But I hope that's clear. Human capital at the individual level, social capital at the societal level. Having said that, let's look at this question. Human capital formation as a concept is better explained in terms of a process which enables individuals of a country to accumulate more capital. No. This more capital is talking about the physical capital, that is money and all. No, it's not right. It has nothing to do with money. Individuals of a country to accumulate more capital need not necessarily lead to higher human capital. So one is wrong. Since one is wrong, this is gone, this is gone. Increasing the knowledge, skill levels and capacities of the people of the country, absolutely yes. This is wrong, this is absolutely yes. Statement 2 is absolutely right. Accumulation of tangible wealth, no. As I said, these are intangible concepts. So this is also wrong. Now, accumulation of intangible wealth, yes. Knowledge is an intangible wealth. Accumulation of intangible wealth, yes, absolutely right. So 2 and 4 are correct. That means option C is the correct option. Now, in the context of any country, which one of the following would be considered as a part of its social capital? Now, the direct question on social capital. Proportion of literates in the population? No, this would probably be the part of the human capital. Stock of its buildings, other infrastructure? No, this is again tangible capital. So this would neither be related to human or social capital. Size of the population in the working age, again related to the human capital. So this, guys, is related to human capital. This is neither related to human nor social capital. This again is related to human capital. What is the last one? The last one is the level of mutual trust and harmony in the society. How much these constituent elements of human capital trust each other, and then the society will decide the social capital. So this, guys, is the correct answer. This is related to social capital. Alright. Now, coming on to a very important topic. That is inflation. So a lot of concepts here and a lot of questions will be following. So now we'll be looking at the topic of inflation, the most important topic, and if you can have a proper understanding of inflation, every other topic will fall in place because it is linked to every other topic in the economy. So let's get started with inflation. The very first question is, what is inflation? So generally what happens is, whenever we come across any news of any XYZ commodity whose price is increased, we say there is inflation. No, that is not actually the definition of inflation. Meaning that if the prices of onions, let's say, goes up today, that's not inflation yet. Why? Because while for calculating inflation, there is a price of a basket of goods and services that is calculated. Now in that basket, one of the product or one of the good will be onion, but like that there will be hundreds of other products as well. So it is very much possible that the prices of onions may have gone up, but the prices of other commodities may have remained same or gone down for a lot of commodities as well. That is why there is possibility that the net impact may be a fall in the prices of the entire basket of goods and services. So that may not actually be inflation, right? So let us understand what the definition of inflation is. Inflation is nothing but, and also one more important thing, the price rise needs to be a sustained one. It cannot happen that today the price is increased, tomorrow again it fell down. So since there was no sustenance in the price, it will again not be inflation. For inflation to occur, there needs to be a sustainable increase in the prices. Okay. So inflation is nothing but a sustained increase. A sustained increase in the prices. So it is a sustained increase in what? In the prices. Prices of what? Basket of goods and services. Basket of goods and services. Not a single commodity, not a single service, but a basket of goods and services. Alright. So that is your inflation. Now what are the causes of inflation? See, inflation can be divided into different types based on different criteria. They can be divided with respect to the degree of inflation. into slow or creeping inflation, or let's say galloping inflation or hyperinflation. We'll see that. At the same time, based on the causes or the reasons for inflation occurring, they can again be divided into two types. So these two types would not just be two types but also give us the reason for inflation. So types as well as reason we'll be studying together. So what are the causes? One can be demand pull inflation. Demand pull inflation. And the other can be a cost push inflation. Demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. This is the first one. So it is very clear the first one is happening due to the increase in the demand, second one due to the increase in the cost. So let us understand how. So this first one is due to the demand supply mismatch. Demand supply mismatch. What do we mean to say? That let's say in an economy there are 100 pens and 100 people need it. So let's say in this scenario the economy is in equilibrium. So this is nothing but the supply, that is 100 pen present in the economy, and this is nothing but the demand, that 100 people want 1 pen each. So it is, let's say, sort of in an equilibrium. But now what can happen is, now the demand can go up and supply remain same. So demand goes to 110, supply remains same. So now since there is more demand, the prices will go up. Another thing what can happen is, demand can go up, at the same time supply can go down. Next year, let's say the economy could not produce, the demand increased to 110, and the next year the economy could not even produce 100 pens, it produced 90 pens. So the mismatch is even higher. Demand can go up and supply can come down. Or demand can remain constant. It was 100, can remain 100, but the supply can come down. Supply was 100, it became 90. So again there is a mismatch. So a mismatch between the demand and supply can cause demand pull inflation, and it can happen in these scenarios. Demand increasing with supply same, demand same but supply got reduced, or demand also got increased and supply got reduced as well. So even more of inflation may occur in that scenario. Okay, so this is due to the demand supply mismatch. Now let's look at cost push inflation. It is a very simple to understand inflation. Cost push inflation is nothing but, simply speaking, it has nothing to do with demand and supply. It has everything to do with the cost of the product going up, because the cost of the raw material which is required to produce that product or good or service has gone up. So whenever the input cost increases, how can the input cost increase? Input cost, let's say I am manufacturing a mobile. So when I am manufacturing a mobile, let's say I import the chip, microchip from China. Now China has increased its price. Now I have no control over it. China has increased the price. So now the chips are costlier. So the phone will be produced at a costlier rate. So the phones will be costlier, right? Did the demand increase made this happen? No, demand is same. Did the supply reduction make this happen? No, so China is ready to supply. Then what made this price go up? The increase in the raw material that was required to manufacture the phone. So whenever the input cost goes up, it may lead to inflation to go up, because the products will now be costlier, and that would be your cost push inflation. Clear? Now how to measure the inflation? The inflation can be measured with the help of index. So there is consumer price index, that is your CPI, and there is the wholesale price index, that is the WPI. Okay, Now consumer price index at the consumer level, wholesale price index at the wholesale level. Now RBI has the responsibility to have inflation targeting. RBI does inflation targeting of what? 4 plus minus 2%. RBI's job is to keep the inflation between 4 plus minus 2%. That means from 2 to 6%. It has to keep the inflation in the range of 2 to 6%. That's the responsibility of the RBI. So what is 2 to 6%? The inflation measured with respect to what? Measured with respect to consumer price index, not wholesale price index. Before 2015, all the measurements of inflation and all which the government used to bring out, that was with respect to wholesale price index. But from 2015 onwards, the Urjit Patel committee had recommended that now it is not the WPI that you should be measuring and regulating, but the CPI. So this 2 to 6% would be what? Would be your CPI, that is CPI, that is consumer price index. Okay. Now remember few important things here. Consumer price index consists of goods plus services, whereas wholesale price index consists of goods only and not services. Now why is that the case? That is the case because services cannot generally be given wholesale. For example, here I am teaching you. Now my knowledge and the knowledge of so many teachers cannot be gathered all together and then sold it later on, right? So it's difficult. You can still manage to do that, but that generally does not happen. That is why in wholesale price index only goods are measured, whereas in CPI goods and services both are measured. Now one interesting point you should also remember here is in consumer price index the weightage of food is high in consumer price index. Why it is high? Because it is consumer price index, it is at the consumer level. So consumer consumes a lot of food articles. Wholesale price index would be at a wholesale level, industrial products, manufacturing products. So all those products would be very high. In fact, if you look at WPI, more than 64% of manufactured industrial products are there. Whereas in CPI, close to 50% alone is the weightage of food in CPI. And here since 64% alone is the manufactured and industrial good, the remaining is only 36%, which is again not entirely food. Okay, so that is also you should remember. Now let's look at the impact of inflation. How does inflation impact? Remember, see, impact may at times be positive or negative. We'll see how. But ultimately, if inflation keeps on increasing and it is unchecked and it increases at a higher rate and becomes hyperinflation, so ultimately inflation will not benefit anyone. But initially at lower levels, it can benefit some, it can harm some. Let us see how. So when you talk about the impact of inflation, so let's talk about the two most important or basic thing over here, the creditor and the debtor. Who is a creditor? A creditor who gives credit. Let's say for example the bank. Who is the debtor? The debtor is the person who takes the loan. For example, you or me, we are taking the loan from the bank. Okay, so these are the concept of creditor and debtor. Now the question is, who benefits during inflation? The creditor or the debtor? Let us see who benefits. So a debtor, let's say, takes a loan of rupees 100 at 10% interest rate. So after a year, the debtor has to return how many rupees to the creditor? Rupees 110. But now let's say there is an inflation in the economy. So inflation is of, again inflation calculated year on year, inflation is of 15%. So whatever you could buy in rupees 100 1 year before, now since there is an inflation of 15%, you would require 115 rupees to buy the same thing, which was 100 rupees previously, right? But remember, the debtor is giving only 110 rupees back. So the creditor is at loss. At that time, if the creditor would have not given this money, kept with them, they could have bought things worth 100 rupees. Now the creditor gets only 110 rupees back. So can the creditor buy thing worth 100 rupees, buy that thing which was worth 100 rupees previously? No, they can't, because they would require 115 rupees. Why? Because 15% is the inflation. Since the inflation is high, what has happened is, and the debtor is giving the loan back at just 10% interest rate. So the debtor is having a benefit of 5% or 5 rupees, whereas a creditor is having a loss of 5 rupees. And since the creditor had given the money for some time, the creditor should have earned some profit. So no profit is earned. On top of that, there is a loss also. I hope that's clear. Now same situation reversed. When the creditor, so we can here only clearly see the debtor is benefiting and the creditor is at a loss. Right? If instead of inflation there would have been deflation, let's say the prices have gone down, so something which you can buy at rupees 100 last year, now you can buy at rupees 90, and in that scenario the debtor is giving 10% interest rate and giving 110 rupees, so the creditor will be benefited in the scenario of deflation if the prices are going down. But in the scenario of inflation, the creditor is harmed and the debtor is benefited. I hope that's absolutely clear. Now let's look at the terms related to inflation. So terms related to inflation can be inflation tax. What is inflation tax? Let's say you have 100 rupees saved with you. You kept your 100 rupees like that. Now the inflation is 10%. So now to buy the same thing which was 100 rupees previously, now you would require to give 110 rupees. Meaning what? Meaning the value of your money has eroded, has gone down. This erosion of value of the money because of inflation is the inflation tax, because it acts like a punishment or acts like a tax which has reduced the value. So what is inflation tax? Erosion of money value due to inflation is an inflation tax. Then there is a concept of inflation premium. Now here the debtor was getting benefited, so some bonus the debtor was getting of 5 rupees because the inflation was higher. So this benefit or the bonus that debtor gets due to inflation is equals to inflation premium. Yeah, so that's what it is. The bonus the debtor gets due to inflation is nothing but the inflation premium. Alright, so now having understood these concepts, let us look at the questions that have been asked on inflation. Okay, so consider the following statements. The weightage of food in consumer price index is higher than that in wholesale price index. Yes, we saw that that is the case because it is at a consumer level. The consumer consumes a lot of food articles. So statement 1 is correct. Since statement 1 is correct, this goes out, only these two are remaining. So our dependency will be on statement 3. But let us look at all the statements. The WPI does not capture the changes in the prices of services which CPI captures. Absolutely right. That is one of the differences between WPI and CPI. Statement 3 says the Reserve Bank of India has now adopted WPI as its key measure of inflation and to decide on changing the key policy rates. No. For key measure of inflation and to decide changing on the key policy rates, now WPI is not used, rather now CPI is used. Right? So statement 3 is wrong, hence this is wrong, hence the correct answer is option A, that is 1 and 2. Now, with reference to the Indian economy, consider the following statements. If the inflation is too high, the Reserve Bank of India is likely to buy the government securities. Buy the government securities. So now other options, other things, other statements are not related to inflation, but I wanted to tell you that at times just the concept of inflation can get you the answer. So I have kept this question also in inflation because the first statement is talking about inflation, and just by knowing that you can actually answer it. So in inflation what happens? Too much of money is chasing too less amount of goods. So when too much of money chasing too less amount of goods, the government would want to control inflation. When the government wants to control inflation, what they have to do is they have to suck out the money from the economy. So how will they suck out the money from the economy? They will sell the government securities. What is a government security? Nothing but a piece of paper. This is a piece of paper. This is the government security. You come up with a government security. Let's say I give you a government security of 1 crore. So you give me 1 crore rupees. So what I have done? I have sucked out 1 crore from the economy. Right? So the government sells the government security to the people so that money is sucked out from the economy. So here it is saying, if the inflation is too high, Reserve Bank of India is likely to buy the government security? No. It is likely to sell the government security. If you buy the government security back from the people, what will happen? You will take the piece of paper back from the people and you will be giving them the money. So that would be giving more money to the economy, leading to more inflation. So you would not be doing that. You would be rather selling the government securities, meaning giving this piece of paper to the people and taking money from that. So the money is sucked out from the economy. So statement 1 here is absolutely wrong. And hence this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, and this is the only right answer. Okay. With reference to inflation in India, which of the following statements is correct? Controlling the inflation in India is the responsibility of the government only. Whenever the word only comes, be very aware. More often than not, it tends to be wrong. So think twice before making such statements to be correct. Is it the responsibility of the government only? No, rather it's the responsibility of the RBI. The Reserve Bank of India has no role in controlling inflation. No, rather it has been given the role to control inflation. So this is wrong. Sorry. Yeah. So this is wrong. This is wrong. Decreased money circulation in the circulation helps in controlling inflation. Increased money circulation helps in controlling inflation. Now even if you were confused in option A and B, you should know that the answer should come from option C and D only. Why? That is because these two are completely opposite options. Completely opposite options. So one of them will be right. Let's see which one. Decreased money circulation helps in controlling inflation? Yes. As I said, inflation is what? More money chasing less goods. So to control inflation, what you have to do? Remove the money from the economy. That means decrease the money circulation in the economy, and that will help inflation. Increase money circulation will not help inflation. It will create more inflation. I hope that's absolutely clear. Now, next, consider the following statements. Inflation benefits the debtors. Yes, we saw that. Inflation benefits the bondholders. Not necessarily. Why? If the bond is an inflation indexed bond, then it will help. What is an inflation indexed bond? Inflation indexed bond will give you return of inflation plus X%. So if inflation is 0, you will get 0 plus X%. So your real increase would be of X%. If inflation is 20%, you will get 20% plus X%. So your return would be 20 plus X%. So when inflation is there, inflation index bonds would really help. So inflation would have benefited the inflation index bond holders. But will it benefit all the general bond holders? The bond holders which are not having inflation index bonds? No, it will not. Hence statement 2 is wrong. Hence only one only is the right answer. Next question. The next question says that a rapid increase in the rate of inflation is sometimes attributed to the base effect. Now what is the base effect? I'll tell you what the base effect is first. Let's understand the concept of base effect. So I hope we all watch cricket or have watched cricket at least at some point. Definitely we would have, at least the majority of us. So what happens is, let's say I am playing for India. Okay. So I play the first match. Let's say you are playing for India. So you play the first match and you score 1 run and you got out. So what is your average? Your average is 1. Okay. Now someone else also played. This is, let's say this is Mr. X. This is Miss Y. Okay, Miss Y also played the first match and she scored 100 runs and got out. So her average is 100. Clear? Now I ask both of you to increase your batting averages. These averages are what? These are batting averages. I ask both of you to increase your batting averages by, let's say, 10%. I ask both of you to increase your batting averages by 10%. So, or let's say I ask both of you to increase your batting averages by 100%. Okay. So, to increase the batting average by 100%, how much Mr. X has to score? If Mr. X, right now the average of Mr. X is 1. So, Mr. X has to increase the batting average by 100%. That means from 1, Mr. X has to go to 2. How will Mr. X go to 2? By scoring just 3 runs. When Mr. X scores just 3 runs, his total runs would be 4 runs. In how many matches? In 2 matches. And average will be what? Average will be 4 runs upon 2 matches, which gives you 2. So from 1, the average will increase to 2. Now for Miss Y to increase the batting average by 100%, she has to increase the batting average from 100 to 200. So how can she do that? She will have to score 300 runs. 300 runs, so that the total is 400 and the number of matches is 2. So that the average would be 400, that is the total runs upon 2 matches, that will be equal to 200. So just imagine Miss Y to increase the batting average by 100%. She is required, sorry, it's not clear. She is required to score 300 runs. And for Mr. X to increase the batting average by 100%, he is required to score just 3 runs. Now, why this huge discrepancy? Because their base was different. After first match, the base of Mr. X was 1 run and the base of Miss Y was of 100 runs. So when the base is bigger, to have a smaller increase in percentage on that bigger base itself would require a lot of doing. But if the base is shorter, then even a slight increase would lead to a huge percentage increase. And that is what has happened recently during the COVID period also, when the GDP was not increasing. So the base remains low in the consecutive years. And then when things went proper, the percentage increase in GDP looked very high, but that was due to a lower base. Okay, so that is the base effect. So they are asking us what is base effect. It is the impact of the drastic deficiency of supply due to failure of crops? No. It is the impact of the surge in demand due to rapid economic growth? No. It is the impact of the price levels of the previous years on the calculation of inflation rate? Yes. It is the impact of the price levels, the batting average of the previous year on the calculation of inflation or the batting average of this year. Okay, so this is the correct option. Next, economic growth is usually accompanied by deflation, no. Stagflation, no. Hyperinflation, no. Inflation, yes. It is generally accompanied by inflation, remember this. But now we have been introduced to a new concept. The new concept is that of deflation. So we will look at two similar concepts, that is disinflation and write it better, disinflation and deflation. Okay, so inflation is what? The general increase, the general sustained increase in the prices of a basket of goods and services. Now, if let's say inflation, a thing costs rupees 100, there is an inflation of 10%, so now it costs rupees 110. Now there is an inflation of 20%, so now it costs 132. What is happening? The rate, there is inflation and the rate of inflation is also increasing. But that need not necessarily happen. At times it can so happen that from rupees 100 it went to 110, that means 10% increase. But afterwards it became, let's say, 116. That means only around 6% increase. So what has happened? There is still inflation, but the rate of inflation has gone down. So when the rate of inflation goes down, we say that there is disinflation. So disinflation is nothing but reduction in the rate of inflation. So inflation is still there, but the rate at which it is increasing has gone down. So that would be your disinflation. Then what is deflation? Deflation is actually the complete opposite of inflation. So what is deflation? It is the decrease in the general level of prices. Meaning if something was of rupees 100 previously, now it will be of less than 100. So decrease in the general level of prices would be your deflation, completely opposite to inflation, whereas reduction in the rate of inflation would be your disinflation. I hope that's absolutely clear. Now in India, which one of the following is responsible for the maintaining of price stability by controlling inflation? Reserve Bank of India. It has the responsibility to do so, right? Now, I think this question is a repeat. We have already done that the weightage of food in consumer price index is higher. WPI does not capture changes in the price of services, which CPI does. And RBI has not adopted WPI. WPI was earlier. Now RBI has adopted CPI. So statement 1 is right, 2 is right, 3 is wrong. So the correct answer would be 1 and 2 only. Now, a rise in the general level of prices may be caused by, so what they are asking? They are asking inflation. Inflation may be caused by what? So inflation may be caused by an increase in the money supply, yes. A decrease in the aggregate level of output, yes. If the supply is less, then also inflation will happen. An increase in the effective demand, yes. So either if the demand increases, inflation will be there. If the supply comes down, then also inflation will be there. If the amount of money increases, then also inflation will be there. So all three are correct, right? So this completes the questions of inflation also. So today we have seen national income accounting, in that GDP, GNP, NDP, NNP, then human capital formation, social capital formation, then inflation, which is a very important chapter. Going forward, we will be seeing other topics, revising other topics, as well as looking at their previous year questions as well. Thank you so much. Stay connected with Legacy IAS.